Welcome everyone to Roots of Faith. For today's episode, I'm sitting down with Father Nathan from Searchers of the Lost YouTube channel. Father, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. It's good to have you with me again.
Awesome. Thank you for having me at your church again, Father. I really appreciate it. I always love stopping by here with Alex whenever we come by Vegas. So thank you for having us.
It's a blast.
Today, I want to talk to you about the concept of Theosis, the teaching of Theosis.
Absolutely.
I am not too familiar with it. I kind of have an idea, just given some of the interviews I've done, but I still have a lot to learn. What can you tell us about Theosis? Want to just dive right into it?
Sure. Yeah. So theosis, I try to explain it in a way that is easily palatable for the Christian mind. It's so obviously theosis is about being conformed into the image and likeness of Christ. So it's it comes from the idea that we're partakers of divine nature. So in what way do we partake of the divine nature? Well, the fullest means by which we do that is participating in Christ, right? Who is the perfect image and likeness of the Father. So God wants to transform us, and he wants us to participate in his divine nature. And the plan by which he accomplishes that task is through incorporating us into the life of his Son. Like, this is the very basic idea of what theosis is. So it's transformational through his Son. And the fathers like to kind of consider this from two different, you can call it lenses of participation in the life of the Son. One is homeosis, which is the transformation into the likeness of the Son. And that typically is connected with the kind of categories of imitatio or imitation. It entails purification. It entails following the life of Christ. It entails following the footsteps of Christ. It entails, and actually even the mundane aspects of who he is. So the imitation of Christ, the participation in his actions and his teachings and his life. The other side of that coin is what the fathers call methexis, or participation, which is it's more of an ontological category. It's being transformed into the Son. So when the fathers speak about this, they're going to talk about things like baptism, the Holy Eucharist, the participation in the same nature as Christ through the same Spirit that dwelt in him. So you can think of theosis as encompassing both of those two concepts in the patristic tradition, which ultimately is the end game of restoring the image and likeness in us, which is most perfectly fulfilled in his Son. So one might also call it Christiformity, but it's a transformation into the life of Christ. So that we're partakers not only now, but we're then given the potentiality. This is from Irenaeus of Lyon. We're given the potentiality of eternal life. So, in other words, to dwell with God so long as God lives.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is it something? Can somebody achieve theosis now, or is it like a distinction between the theosis that we can experience here on earth versus what will be our ultimate destiny, in the afterlife?
Yeah, so there's different levels of theosis, and you might even within our tradition, and I'm speaking here broadly, both Eastern and Latin, or Greek and Latin, we might say. There's a continual progression in our relationship to the Holy Trinity, because God is infinite and we're finite. There's infinite potential for our growth, since we are beings that do transition. Right. So even in our liturgical prayers, for example, we lift up even the Panagia, even the Holy Theotokos. We even pray for her, because even she's growing continually as she knows God more and more. So some would say we can attain theosis in this life, meaning you've attained a state of unification with God. So if you have the kind of three pathway of growth, right? Purification, illumination, unification, which both churches teach. Unification is that final step of theosis. And so there are steps that lead to unification, but even once you reach, let's say that you have an incredibly holy saint who reaches the state of being completely unified with God and will, and restoration of nature, you still are awaiting the final state, which is beatification, right? Which is being which is given. Well, the final state would be the resurrection, and then we're made complete. But nonetheless, like you can reach a very high degree of theosis, if you will, because it really is a degree thing here on earth, and that's the aim of the holy saints, and they've gone a lot farther in accomplishing that task through Christ.
You said beatification. Is there anywhere where the Greeks depart? Because I know some of them take issue with the idea of like the beatific vision. Where does that play into the idea of theosis?
Well, the scripture says that it's the pure in heart that shall see God. So the entire Eastern spirituality is all about purifying the heart so that we might have the beatific vision. We have the same goal in mind, to be able to see God face to face, and in that interaction of seeing God face to face, to have infinite joy. So it's the same goal.
What about like where does the not to get? I mean, I don't know how deep we want to get into the weeds here, but what about the idea of like the essence versus energies? How does that play into the idea of theosis? Because we're not able to. I guess God's essence is incomprehensible, and I don't know if it's something that humans can participate in versus his energies in the afterlife. I don't know if that would be an appropriate distinction.
It does, yeah. I mean, it definitely comes into play, and there's going to be some slight divergence here at a universal level, because so within the Latin tradition, you don't necessarily need to believe in essence energy distinction, right? So some Latin fathers would be perfectly happy with this kind of a thing, right? Thomists don't typically make that distinction. They have another way of talking about it. They emphasize grace as lifting up what is natural, nature. So grace is above nature. It lifts up your nature so that you can participate in the grace of God. But nevertheless, it's a direct participation in God when this grace lifts you up. Now, I mean, just to be clear, the fathers use different terms. They sometimes use energies, they sometimes use powers, they sometimes use grace. The Eastern Church more consistently is going to use the term energy, but these aren't incompatible conceptions of the way in which we participate in the divine life of God. They're different terms. Terms. Whenever we're talking about the mystery of the Holy Trinity, we're going to be grasping at straws to come up with the appropriate terminology to describe that encounter, right? St. Paul has this experience where he goes into the third heaven, and he says, I can't really give words to this expression. So the benefit of the Eastern model, I think, is that it has a kind of explanatory power in the sense that it's saying, look, we know for sure that we are directly participating in God via his energies, via his actions, if you will. But it's certainly not the case that the Latins do not believe that you're participating in the actions of God. So, I was struck by the fact that when you read, for example, Garrigou-Lagrange, who's the main interpreter of Aquinas, and you read Dimitri Staniloae, they're both talking about the causes of God within us. Whether you're talking about the causes being called grace, or you're talking about the causes being called energy, you're both affirming that God is directly transforming the human nature to a higher state of being so that we're able to directly participate in God.
Would the analogy of like the sun and the sun's rays be used in this type of scenario?
Yep. And you can find those analogies in both Eastern and Western traditions, right? And so like St. Thomas Aquinas, for example, will use a parallel idea when he talks about it being like coal within itself, and without fire is unable to glow as coal. But once the fire is placed on the coal, now it's able to, through that energy source, be transformed and become fiery coal, which is now capable of new things that it never was able to do on its own nature without an external energy source.
So where do Greek Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, where do they kind of depart from this type of thing? Because all this is making sense to me, but I know online and from people I've talked to, like they posit this idea that it's not compatible, the Latin view of looking at sanctification versus the Eastern view. But the way you're presenting it, it sounds like you can make sense of both ideas and they're not incompatible.
Yeah, I think we're using different languages to describe the exact same experience. So again, it's like, well, you experience, Diadochos of Photiki made this like really interesting distinction, and forgive me if I forgotten the proper terms, but I believe it's a distinction between a theologian and a philosopher, like a theologian might encounter God directly, but maybe won't be able to, even if I'm getting the terms wrong, the concepts are right, okay? A theologian will be able to have an encounter with God, but won't necessarily be able to explain it, whereas a philosopher can actually have the experience and then explain it as well. You also have kind of secondary level theologians, which are faithful by properly using the writings of the fathers to deduce a conclusion about those writings which line up with their teachings without necessarily even having a noetic experience. So the distinction that's important to grasp here is that being able to talk about a subject is not a bad thing. It's better to have the experience of the subject, but no one is able to properly talk about the encounter of Theosis, the encounter with the Holy Trinity, because God is beyond explanation, right? So he's ineffable. This is St. Dionysius the Areopagite. Anytime that you talk about God, you're going to always have to add the term hyper or beyond, right? Because he's not just goodness, he's beyond goodness. So all of us are weak in our human analogies of explaining this thing, because if we talk to somebody who's never had an encounter with the divine or any level of encounter with God, then the only analogies that humans have accessible to them are human analogies of goodness. So you're going to think about your mom, your dad, your husband, your wife, your children. You're going to think about mountains. You're going to think about, surfing for somebody, right? Those are experiences of goodness which function as analogies in communication so that we can actually begin to relate somehow an experience of goodness to God. And so our human analogies, because they're limited in scope and limited in reason, are only able to go so far when we actually try to put this let's say we have this encounter into terms. So, one of the things that I've noticed is that the theologians that seem to most deeply encounter God, let's think about like Saint Symeon, the new theologian, Ephraim the Syrian, Isaac, let's say John of the Cross, they're poets. Mm-hmm. They're poets because they realize they cannot like dogmatically talk about terms which are just beyond human terminology, right? Because it's God. God's beyond human terminology. So they're doing their best. That's how I would put it. They're doing their best at describing what this encounter is like. And I'd say with the East, because the East has focused on this subject of theosis so long, it's so consistently, it's created a vocabulary that is able to comprehensively delve into the subject of theosis, whereas the West seems to be a bit more fragmented in the way that they try to describe this. So it has, I think, at times a harder time at consistently articulating this encounter with the Western saints have consistently had.
What do you think? Like I often hear from Eastern Orthodox that the East, they view the noetic faculty to be the highest faculty of man, versus the West that views the rational intellect.
That's wrong. Yeah, so Augustine understood, like for example, that the mens would be equal to the noetic faculty. In the Latin, you have distinctions of terms, as just like in Greek. So in Greek, you have like dianeia is the rational faculty of discursive reasoning, and ratio is the faculty within the Latin tradition of discursive reasoning. But intellectus and mens have a similar potentiality to describing the noetic encounter with God. So, and then it even goes beyond that, because in the Latin tradition, this goes all the way back to Jerome, synderesis, which is it's like conscience, it's like your conscience, but it's able to understand God, or understand like moral decision making in God at a level that's according to like particular cases of moral quandary. So you have within the Western conception this same ideas of the intellect having noetic capabilities and not simply having discursive reasoning as the means of encounter with God. So sometimes in the Latin tradition, you can have the intellect, like over intellect being more directly connected with discursive reasoning as the means of knowing God. I think that you're not going to find that so much in like the Franciscan tradition, the Carmelite tradition, the Carthusian tradition. You find that more in the Thomistic tradition. But in the West, you certainly, like if you read any of the Carmelite, Carthusian, et cetera, folks I've just mentioned, they're utterly convinced that you need to in order to encounter God directly, you need to abandon intellectual conceptions of God and enter into imageless prayer. It's the same thing as the Eastern tradition. You need to reach out to God with your heart. You need to reach out with God with your desiring faculty to experience God directly, and remove your intellectual biases in order to do so. So if you read like De Balma, he'll even say like don't even like think about the Theotokos. Don't even think of images of Christ. Move everything out of your mind when you're moving at this level of prayer. So this is deep noetic prayer, and it exists both in the Eastern and Western tradition.
I had heard St. Thomas Aquinas, like towards the end of his life, I guess he had some kind of vision or some type of experience of God, and he was able to look at all of his writings and kind of reflect and say, nothing that I've written. So I don't want to butcher what he said, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right? Like nothing.
It's all a straw
compared to what I was able to experience. Right?
Yeah.
Do you think,
I think that's true, because noetic prayer is the deepest encounter with God.
Like the intellect can only get us so far.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And so, so Thomas Aquinas, it doesn't mean that he was unfaithful in his writing any more than any theologian who's used, it was everybody, East and West, compiled what are called Florilegium, right? So compilations of the teachings of the fathers. And everybody, East and West, when they came to the debate table, brought that Florilegium with them and said, let's put the teachings of the fathers on the table and see what conclusions are the best conclusions in regards to being faithful to the tradition we received. Well, we'll say Thomas Aquinas was simply doing that. But when he had a noetic encounter with God, he realized, like all writings, all words are insufficient of properly explaining this encounter with God. This isn't like this, and this isn't mind-blowing. Every saint would say that. There's no saint which would say, a direct encounter with God is lesser than working through Florilegium. Everyone agrees. So people use that to somehow
I think they misconstrue it to mean that he was wrong about everything he formulated.
No, any father would say that. You cannot give me one example of a father of the church, not a single example, who would not say direct apprehension of God through Noetic prayer is a lesser form of theology than doing florilegium discursive theology, right? Scholastic theology, by nature, of course, is a lesser form of theology than direct apprehension of God, you know?
And I think, I mean, it makes sense. Like, if you're able to conceive of God, then it's probably not God. If you're able to fully have this understanding, this full conception of God, then it's, you know, there's no way that our fallible human intellect's going to reach that. I mean, because we've established the idea that theosis is present, the concept is present in all of the traditions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just expressed differently.
Mm-hmm. It's expressed differently. But that doesn't mean we can't have more accurate ways of portraying that experience. So essence and energies makes sense to me. I'm not an expert on the Thomistic distinctions versus the essence and energy distinctions. I can tell you that absolutely the Latin tradition talks about deification. So Garrigou Lagrange, again, expert on Aquinas, he says deification. Right? We're having the same conversation, but the question of God's divine simplicity and how that functions. Okay, so that's like an open dialogue. That's an open question that has to happen. And so the experts can keep moving on. And I think this is how it kind of has to work with these particularities that we haven't quite come to an absolute agreement on. Is they can keep the experts can keep working through that, but I don't think that the ordinary Christians need to make that the most important thing in the world, because we know we're talking about the same thing. So now are there better ways in which we can express this in terms? There are better ways. The church has always accepted that there are better ways. Right? The development of the ecumenical councils are trying to more adequately determine the proper terminology for Christology and the Holy Trinity in particular. And that takes hundreds of years. It took the church hundreds of years. So we can't be so impatient that thinking, like a lot of people think, like the current state of history, we've reached the final conclusion, and like we should be happy with that. But no, the scripture is very clear that like with the Holy Spirit's going to continually unveil the truth to us. And the more that we enter into to do honest dialogue, that means we're not shying away from admitting that there are difficulties yet within our respective traditions. The more that we both sit at a table and say, let's really work this thing through. Let's really have conversations in the spirit of grace. Let's be diligent to preserve the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. But that doesn't mean shying away from the tough questions. I think the closer we'll get to being able to come to some kind of final resolution on understanding the distinctions between divine simplicity and the way in which we express essence and energy, which I really don't think is a major problem. But nevertheless, I do acknowledge that there's ways in which we could more clearly and adequately express these distinctions as a synthesis.
Yeah.
So I think that takes patience, though, to let that work out. And you can have patience if you are undergoing theosis, so long as you're faithful to the tradition of the church.
Yeah, I think both traditions can learn from each other, and I think we're at a point, at least in the online apologetic space, where we think it's our side or no side. But it's like, no, I think, honestly, the West has so much to learn from the East. There's so much to be gleaned from the Eastern tradition that the West could definitely use, especially in today's time. Yeah. However, vice versa, and I'm going to get a lot of heat for this, I think the East has a lot to learn from the West too. Yeah. I see, and I know they don't mean to, but I see a lot of denigration of the intellect, that I see a limit to certain conversations, that they're not able to express certain theological concepts, that there's a limit, which is fine. I mean, I guess that could be looked at as like, that's okay. That's not their goal, right? But I do think that there's something that both sides can learn from each other.
Well, so I would, this is kind of what I was saying before. So when it comes to lay persons, or even to most like average priests, like average, like if you're not a theologian, I don't think it should be your responsibility to have to figure out how the church communicates the synthesis, because that takes an incredible amount of work, right? So I think you need to live a life in fidelity to the tradition that you've received. Where I think there is a responsibility is that where there is some negligence here is that, and this is on both sides. I talked to Latin Catholics who knew nothing about the East, and I talked to Orthodox Christians who knew nothing about the West. It's like, well, yeah, we do have a responsibility to affirm the universal patristic tradition. So all of us are responsible. Like, you can't just say, I don't like Augustine, I don't like Jerome, I don't like the Latin fathers. If you're Orthodox, they don't get to come into my like mindset. Like, they're not allowed in here because the Eastern are better. It's like, well, no, that's never been how the church thought. If you read any of the councils, like where Orthodox and Latins got together, none of them were trying to make the claim, Greeks are better than Latins or Latins are better than Greeks. Like, this is a contemporary phenomenon. So it's a reactionary thing. Where they're overreacting to their own detriment is by becoming anti-intellectual.
Yeah.
To be anti-intellectual is to be anti-theosis, and I'll tell you why. The Holy Scripture tells us to love the Lord our God with all of our heart and all of our mind and all of our soul and all of our strength. There's a totality in the process of theosis. So they're overreacting to intellect because because in the Western tradition, we've too oftentimes placed by intellect now, I do mean discursive reasoning. We've placed the power of discursive reasoning too high. We put it above, like in practical terms, in practical realities, right? Like, I once heard someone say that, like, the problem with the Western church is that they've made canon lawyers the head of their churches. That's a serious charge, and I think that there's a lot of truth to it, right? So we've made in the Latin church oftentimes the intellects the highest sources of authority, and that it's a real mistake. Because, and this is the key, because it's the noetic aspect of man that makes him most like God. It's that part of his soul that directly encounters God that is most vital. Now, the Latin tradition already has that. I already said that, right? I guess talked about the mens. But it is a practical truth that they've done that. So the Orthodox shoot themselves in the foot when they say, well, so I want to be anti-intellectual. No. There's a problem here, because in theosis, the noetic encounter with God, we'll put it like that whatever that highest level is that encounters God, is actually supposed to transform all other aspects of humanity. So it's supposed to transform what are called the passible aspects of the soul, the desiring aspect of the soul, the appetitive aspect of the soul, the mind, the intellect, the brain, if you will. It's supposed to transform those things so that the totality of man experiences theosis. That's the end game, is resurrection, where the whole body, the whole mind, the whole will, the whole intellect, the whole appetite, the whole emotional aspect of man is completely submitted to God and undergoes theosis. So even at creation will at some level experience theosis. So it is detrimental to Orthodox soteriology to claim that the mind doesn't matter, that the intellect doesn't matter. But where I think Orthodox are very, very clear and consistent and right as theologians, as intellectuals, like within the patristic tradition, is that you gotta first start with the restoration of the heart to God. Right. So that's not disagreed on in the Latin tradition, but the Latin tradition, unfortunately, has in practice not seemed to have followed through consistently as the Orthodox Church has. So this would be where coming back to your point, like where we can help each other. Like the Latin Church offers. And really, it's like the intellectual. Like most Orthodox would agree that if you want to find like good scholarly sources, you oftentimes need to go to Latin churches. They're good scholars, and that's because they've emphasized the intellect. That doesn't mean they're better. All of us have to read Protestant commentaries on Scripture because Protestants have focused on Scripture and they've done a really good job at like historical critical research. So when I flip that on the other side, like here's how I think the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Church, we might call it, can help the Latin Church. It's to say, hey, look, you guys like in practice have not followed through with your theology by overemphasizing these things. We have consistently practiced purification as the means by which we are transformed, where we're practically speaking putting the noetic life above the logical life, the scholastic life, and we're reaping incredible fruits by doing so, by accumulating numerous saints through this practice. So I think that the Orthodox Church does have a lot to teach the Latin Church about noetic prayer and refocusing attention on what matters most, and saying, you guys got to get back to purification. Like you can't reach theosis without purification. Okay, so that the Latin Church isn't enforcing fasting, like that's crazy. That it's not enforcing like ascetical practices, right? Like self-denial is the key. So where I understand a real need in the Latin tradition in regards to its understanding of theosis is much more in practical terms. So, to purify yourself takes your energy to be completely directed on God. And that means ridding yourself of any false thoughts, ridding yourself of any thoughts that are a distraction from God. That means you've got to fast. You've got to deny yourself. You've got to pick up your cross. You've got to do vigils. You've got to focus on unceaseless Jesus prayer. If you don't do that, you're not going to be purified. And too many Latins I know just, you're suffering from something, throw a novena on it, put on a scapular. And it's like the tit for tat theology thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for purification, because purification takes like dogmatic, like absolute, I'm going forward with my focus on Christ at every moment. It's never going to be that God's going to magically transform me if I put on a scapular, or if I pray 10 decades of the Rosary, or if throw a novena at it, or if I have a devotion to Maggiore. That's never going to work. Those are temp fixes. Those are band-aids. You've got to focus on purification. And if you want to include those devotional practices into the process of purification, okay, have at it. But purification is the necessary first step, and it's got to be the most important thing in order to attain theosis right from the start. So that's where I think the Orthodox Church could really teach us something, because they've been doing that consistently since the Desert Fathers. And the language is incredibly consistent and coherent. And so there's a lot to offer there.
A lot of their fathers are not anti-intellectuals. I mean, you have like St. John of Damascus, you have St. Maximus the Confessor, you have really, bolstered saints in that category that are also deep in noetic prayer. On a practical way, how do you think, if you're a Latin Catholic or if you're Eastern Orthodox, how do you think you can learn? Like, what should you do to learn more about the other side? This is actually why I really like the Western Rite Orthodox, because they're they're fully cognizant that they're a part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So they have an appreciation for things Eastern, but they also have an appreciation for things Western.
Yeah, that's
and
cool.
They get the best of both worlds in a way that's not compromising the faith. That would be arguable for a lot of people, but from what I can tell, in a way that they're able to fully appreciate both sides. Like when I've spent time at the Western Rite Orthodox Church, they have St. Gregory Palamas in the church, and they also have the Western saints. They have St. Benedict. So they found a way to appreciate both sides and fully look at, the essence energies, but also some of the Western style way of thinking. On a practical way, how do you think, like the lay person, if there's a lay person that's like, I'm Eastern Orthodox, I would like to learn more about the Latin tradition, or you're Latin Catholic, what can I get from the East?
Yeah, I mean, so like just for starters, what I'm trying to argue here is like you can't really be Orthodox if you're anti-intellectual, because your intellect is part of the process of theosis. You can't be anti-emotional.
Yeah.
You can't be
And I don't think a lot of them would say that that's their intention, to be anti-intellectual, but I do think it is a byproduct of putting the intellect in a certain category. It becomes just a practical byproduct of doing that.
Well, what I'm trying to argue is it's not. Like, we have to agree that the noetic, the mens is highest faculty. That the spiritual faculty of man we have to agree on that. The problem is not that. The problem is that then to make the next step, that the intellect is therefore unimportant.
Right.
That's where there's a craziness. But they're right. If someone thinks that like theology is just about knowing about God, well, then they've put the intellect above the experience of God. That's where you get the problem. So I would just say, like, you drop the fear of the intellect. If you drop the fear of the intellect, allow the spiritual life to be what impacts your intellect, transforms your intellect, then there's really no worries.
You know where I think it also can stem from is that the idea that, and I believe this, the idea that if you do, because a lot of us, we're humans, we're fallen, we don't have self-control. So when those of us that start to engage in the intellectual side, we let that become a source of pride. Like, I know this much.
Yeah,
I've read the catechism front to back. I've read the Bible front to back. I've read the councils front, So we start getting this pride. And I think that's just that can be a temptation. And I think the East, sometimes, I've heard them say that could be a temptation too. Like, I know so much about the faith, and
everyone's tempted by that. We're all. It's not just Westerners. Everyone's tempted by that.
Yeah.
We're all tempted, because even when you have the folks who are like anti-intellectual, well, guess what? You have to put that in terms. So you're making an intellectual argument against it. So once you do that, you just shoot yourself in the foot, right? So there's a way of being humble in this process,
I do think it is easy to tip over to the other side, though, especially in today's era where we want to like dominate conversations. We want to debate Protestants. Oh, next time I debate a Protestant, I just found out this fact. I want to make sure I present that to them, or like,
Well, because you kind of live in that world, right? Like you're living in the world of interviewing people who want to argue. Right. Yeah. But the truth be told, like when you read most of the fathers, like they have no interest in that. Right. They're trying to attain salvation. And then the like argument thing is usually other people pulling them in. Like, join our argument. We're having a good, well, I kind of want to pray, but okay,
like St. Gregory Palamas, I think that was pretty much what happened, right? He was kind of forced into a position. Now he has to give a defense of why they're doing those things on the Holy Mountain.
Yeah, and and Gregory Palamas talks a lot about this conversation that we're having right now. But if you actually read what he seems to be saying, when he's arguing against the Barlamites, he's not just arguing against like a different theology. He's mostly arguing, at least in his first book, he's mostly arguing like these guys think that like you can study science and come to a knowledge of God. They think that you can like study astronomy. They think that like by having a liberal education, because they're being impacted by humanism. Like Barlam was impacted by humanism. So he's mostly arguing against people who think that the way to attain a knowledge of God is like through studying modern sciences, modern that you're going to somehow get to God. And so he wants to make the point, like, look, the philosophers, Plato, Socrates, they only were able to get so far.
Right.
In order to actually get to God, you have to have an experience of God. You have to encounter God himself. And so, I mean, that's the kind of anti-intellectualism which I think is always justified. But there is an idolatry of theology, which I've certainly fallen into. There's an idolatry of theology wherein we think that we've acquired enough information, we're somehow now a theologian, and that would be a tremendous error, a detrimental error. Like that could actually lead you to hell.
Yeah.
If that's how you think about your relationship with God.
What do you think the role of philosophy plays in our understanding of theology, I suppose?
Well, like you already pointed out, right?
Yeah.
The Cappadocians, St. John Damascene, they all used philosophy. So the church is I mean, you know, Harnack had this great criticism against the early development of the church, that it was overly Hellenized. Well, I mean, and he's not wrong that Hellenization is a huge part of the development of the church, both Latin and Greek. So philosophy can serve as a handmaid to theology, so long as it's in submission to theology. What philosophy offers us, and I'm particularly thinking about, you know, like Aristotle and Plato, the Neoplatonists, sometimes Stoics, is that it can help us with putting things into categories, and so like more clearly defining terms. And if anybody who thinks that doesn't matter needs to read the Council of Nicaea, right? We're very specific about the terms, like you know, homeosis, homeosios. Like we want to get that term down,
right?
Because we want to do our best to most adequately describe this encounter with God that we're having. So philosophy really is quite helpful for us to clearly communicate with terminology.
What do you think about its role in defining something like transubstantiation, where they use Aristotelian terms to?
Well, so the church doesn't teach that you have to hold to Aristotelian metaphysics when you're teaching transubstantiation. So it teaches transubstantiation, which is that it's transformed from bread and wine into the sacramental body and blood of Christ. But that doesn't mean that you're bound to Aristotle's metaphysics. So his Aristotle's metaphysics are just perhaps at this point in history, the clearest way of being able to make distinctions.
Yeah.
You don't have to do it. If you can come up with a better way of making distinctions, the church says have at it. You know, but that's just right now, that seems to be the clearest way of dealing with it.
If I'm not mistaken, even some of the ideas that St. Gregory Palamas presented, I think there's some of it that stems also from Aristotle and Plato, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, they're all influenced by Neoplatonism, which is a combination of Plato and Aristotle. Everyone is. So he's like, no one, like, people oftentimes think like Greek East is Plato and the Latin West is Aristotle. It's not true, because Neoplatonism is a combination. It uses both Aristotle and Plato. So both churches are indebted to both philosophers for the ways in which they articulate ideas, concepts, terminology. You know, even the word theosis didn't come from Christians. It came from philosophers.
I didn't know that.
The word theologian, Aristotle used it before any church father used it. We use a lot of the same terminology, but we make it Christoform. We allow it to submit to the truth of Christianity, because Christ is the fulfillment of all philosophy. Christ is the fulfillment of all goodness and beauty, right? So all of these things, all of these philosophical categories, they start off with one particular meaning that's incomplete without Christ, and then once Christianity gets involved, we can now make more perfect sense of the thing, you know? So I was reading the book. Have you read Mountain of Silence before? So Mountain of Silence is a story about this guy who goes and he stays with a monk, and the pseudonym is Maximus. And he's talking to this monk about the experience of Christ. And he's like, it sounds like what you're saying is Plato's analogy, right? Like, they're guys in a cave and they're chained against a wall, and all they can see is their shadows, and outside there's light. And like a few souls like get the strength to like get up and go outside and see the light, and then for the rest of their life they come back and they try to convince people, but it's really hard because they just believe that this is all there is to reality, right? Yeah. And Monk Maximus goes, yeah, but that light out there is Christ.
Yeah.
So it's just a perfecting. It's a Christoformity of Plato's cave analogy. Mm-hmm. Plato wasn't wrong about this, but it was incomplete.
What would you say to somebody that, like the East, if they say, well, the end goal is theosis, and our church has a means of achieving a theosis, and we've proven that through just the Noetic prayer, through that type of what we've already had. So what would be the benefit of exploring the Latin tradition if we're already making saints pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, so the fundamental problem that I have with anybody who says I don't need you is that you're contradicting Paul. Right? So the foot say to the eye, I have no need of you, shall the, et cetera. Right. The passage, right? Yeah. So 1 Corinthians 13 through 14 in particular focuses on the need of the entire body of Christ to be functioning in harmony and unity. If Christ called somebody, if someone is elect, if someone is set apart for the glory of God, then you automatically have a need of them, right? So when we start thinking of persons as objects which fulfill functions, mm-hmm. then we've already misunderstood personhood. So like my fundamental problem with anybody who says, and I've heard this on both sides, like Latins who say like, well, Orthodox are like, they're a minority and so they're unimportant. It's like, really? That's mm-hmm. your logic? Minorities are unimportant? Do you see that it's fallacious, and it's not just fallacious, but it's undignified towards humanity. So yeah, I would say, that would be my first point. But then okay, let's move past why that's unethical for you to make such a statement. Let's talk about what you're actually trying to get at here, which is that we seem to be complete. Well, are you complete? Do you have no need of the Latin Church? Well, the truth is that the Orthodox Church needs the Latin Church. In particular, I think of, as you already brought up, the importance of categorizations, the importance of unanimity in governance, the importance of missions, outreach, hospitals. The Latin Church has been incredibly successful. It's always been the case, by the way. If you just study ancient history, the Romans have always been good at law, at jurisprudence, right. at taking the creativity of the Greeks and making it coherent and holistic. And so there's it's just almost like a people thing. Romans are really helpful for Greeks. Greeks are really good at poetry. They're really good at creative innovations, just traditionally, right? If you look at the ancient Greeks, they're good philosophers, they're good thinkers. Romans are good codifiers. They're good at, so there's always, the reason that the Roman Empire functioned so well is that it was able to take multiple vantage points of talents and skills, which are all reflections of God, by the way, and to draw them together into a coherent soul, to a coherent whole. So, yeah, I mean, read Augustine and tell me that there's nothing helpful or beneficial in the way that his intellect processes the teachings of the church. It's no, clearly he's bringing something unique to the table. What Aquinas did and what Aquinas did was take John Damascene's model and go even further in trying to answer more questions with more clarity, with more florilegium. He was trying to make an advance on this. Now you can argue that you don't think that he did that, if you like, but I would say that's a huge value within the Latin tradition, outside of the human element, which is that encountering other holy people enjoying the communion of the saints is a pleasure that I think we should all hold with utter dignity and respect. Think about it like this: like Jesus in John 17 prays that his church that his body would be one and share the same glory with the Father. So it's like to say, if your real vision of life is that you want to participate in the Holy Trinity and the holy angels and saints, but you don't want a group, you don't care if another group or another part of the body of Christ is there, what spirit are you speaking from?
Right. Do you think the East would define holiness differently than the West? For example, I often see from the East, they try to compare the saints, right? At least even the contemporary saints, and they look at the caliber of the saints that they have on their side, and some of the ones that the West has canonized as saints, and they try and like kind of, well, they see a difference, right? They see a difference in like a Saint Paisios versus somebody in the West, you know? Do you think they would define holiness differently?
Yeah, sometimes I struggle with this question. And I think it's because I'm so infatuated in love with like the Greek saints, that sometimes when I'm reading some Western saints, certainly not all, like I wouldn't be talking about like St. John of the Cross, for example, here, but I don't want to throw certain saint under the bus, so I'll try not to mention
You don't have
names.
to name any
Yeah,
names.
but yeah, some of the Western saints, I'm like, that's a struggle for me. Like the way that you're processing the faith, the way that you are expressing theosis seems slightly off to me. Some of the like the bridal language gets really weird to me. What I'll do with that saint thing is like, okay, I need to put you over here. Like I really struggle with saint. I'll say Faustina. Like I really struggle with that. So I'm just going to put you over here and say for now, you're not going to be my focus. Right. You're not providing the fruit that I want for my life right now. So I'll just put them aside and say, okay, you're for someone else. Okay. My saint, Saint Paisios, and that's fine. You know, you can put certain people aside without having to judge them, without having to come with some kind of final conclusion. I'd go more into that, but I'll move on to the question of sanctification, holiness. Holiness just means being set apart. God alone is holy. We're set apart for God. Everyone agrees in that. So I don't know that we have a different understanding of holiness. There was that interview that I did with Father Mike where he said something that I'd never heard before, that when Romans say that they want to be saints, what they're saying is they want to be saved. That's kind of new for me. Because I hear a lot of Romans say, I want to be saints. I want to be a saint. And that's really foreign to an Eastern mind. Like to say I want to be a saint. It's like, well, it sounds like I want to be glorified in my mind. I'm not saying that's true, but it feels different. But sometimes our communication modes are just really, really different. Yeah. So I don't want to say that it is different, but I want to say that that's not how an Eastern person thinks when you say like, I want to be a saint. Like we would just say like I want to be saved, but he's saying that's what they mean. But I have a hunch that they mean more than that. That they I don't know. Maybe I don't have a good answer to this question, but at this time in my life, I will be really happy if I'm the least in the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
I'm so convinced that I lack purity, that me becoming a saint is the farthest thing from my mind.
Yeah.
Like I'm not even processing this idea of being a saint. I'm just let me get through this life and have some development in my purity, and I'll be a pretty happy guy. So I don't think like that. You would never hear me say I want to be a saint. That would be so weird for me to say. So yeah. I do think that the fact that I hear a lot of Latin say I want to be a saint makes me think we might have some different ideas here. Like for for an Eastern mind to be a saint, you have to have gone through, like outside of the martyrs, okay? You have to have gone through like incredible purification.
Yeah.
Like you have to be completely purified. And you have to have been illuminated by the divine grace. And your heart has to be transformed to where even when you're in the most sorrowful of situations, you have the joy of Christ. It's supernatural. It's like, it's beyond, it's beyond just like saying like, yeah, that guy's like set apart for God. So like all of us would agree that, yeah, the biblical definition of a saint, St. Paul had no problem with saying everyone's saints, right? To the saints who are in Ephesus, everyone. But we're not just talking about the biblical definition of a saint. We're talking about the development theory of what a saint is in the experience of the ecclesia. So for an Eastern mind, yeah, a saint really needs to be someone who's gone through the ringer and come to that kind of final point of if not reaching theosis, almost reaching theosis.
I think that's a really good distinction. And it wasn't until I started interacting with Eastern Orthodox that I truly felt like I was in the presence of a saint.
Yeah, you said that. That's awesome.
With some of those people. I think that you hit the nail right on the head. It's the purification and illumination. Sometimes on the Catholic side, it's harder to see that, I guess. It would be harder to see that.
People try to jump right to illumination. Yeah. I see that a lot with Latins. They want to jump right to illumination.
I see good, virtuous
like
people.
Mysticism.
I see good virtue, and I see like that guy's a really good person. But there's a difference between that guy's a really good person and wow, I think there's no words sometimes. Like it's just I could feel I could feel something emanating from this person, the light of Christ maybe, or just some type of grace. So I think
we have a guy in this parish who's like that.
Yeah, I mean that might just be my subjective experience. Somebody else could just walk up to that guy and be like, he's no different than a plumber. You're like just some random guy or something.
Yeah.
But that just might be my personal experience. But
yeah, I mean, it's hard because the teaching of the fathers is that sometimes saints see saints, and so like they can see the divine light like coming off of each other, which is like it's wild. But I remember one time when I was at St. Anthony's and I met this monk from Patmos, and when I looked into his eyes, I was like there's like incredible light.
Yeah.
It's wow. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not the guy who's the saint saying the saint, because like I said, I'm just a guy trying to be purified at this point in my life. But I did notice like, yeah, there's a holiness there. And I think that the Orthodox are producing that kind of holiness more consistently because they're on all honesty, because they're focusing on the life of purification and noetic prayer. Mm-hmm. They've just like, so, hesychasm is the ascetical practice of noetic stillness linked with the watchfulness and deepened by the unceasing Jesus prayer. So the Jesus prayer is a necessary component of theosis or of hesychasm, because all of those other elements of hesychasm are practiced within many monastic communities in the West. But the church life of the Eastern churches incorporates like all of the elements, the Jesus prayer, purification. So I think that it's easier to live the life of purification when you have fasting seasons, when you have the offices, when you have, you're focusing on reading the Synaxarion, the life of the saints, when your theology derives out of the practice of the holy services and not out of like books. Mm-hmm. It's like some of us like I know Catholics who like carry on the catechism, and that's their source. Their whole source is like papal documents, catechism. It's like, that's never been the means of attaining purification. Yeah. And so that's where a lot of times Orthodox, I think, are quite right in saying like, why do these Latins focus so much on the intellectual life? Yeah. Like, don't they realize if they lived the faith, and that's where I feel very bad for many Roman Catholics today, because they go into their liturgies and they're not getting the deposit of the faith, in the sense that a lot of these churches seem to be just like bad 80s Protestant music. Yeah. I went into a Catholic church the other day, and a priest came out and he started by singing Amazing Grace. It's like, Okay, I like
Yeah.
that song, Amazing Grace, and I'll listen to that when I'm driving in the car. It's no place in the Holy Liturgy. This thing's supposed to be transcendent.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be an encounter with the life of the saints,
Transformative.
not an encounter with Wesleyans,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel bad for the Latins because right now I think they're struggling because they're not. And it's not the people's fault, obviously. What they're not being given the life which clearly leads to sainthood in their liturgies. Like, I'm not speaking about all their liturgies, but it seems to be broadly, and I don't know this out of as much personal experience as all of these Catholics who come and tell me what they're experiencing. I can't believe that happened with what they tell me. And so yeah, there's something to that. There's something to that. You know, I was talking to Alex yesterday and it's like, I really want to say, like, the first thing we got to fix here, right? In the Latin Church is liturgy again, right? And, you know, I won't give any more context to that conversation, but I think that's right. I think that's right.
It could be very detrimental. I mean, people literally leave the church because of the liturgy. They'll leave the church because of the liturgy.
Yeah.
Or they'll join another church because of the liturgy. Like, I had a friend who was going through a bad breakup, and he was seeking God. And I told him, I was like, so I had an idea in my head. I'm like, well, I could take him to the Catholic Church, but I know there's not going to be anything transformative about his experience there. If he goes to the Novus Ordo, if I take him to the Novus Ordo. So I said, why don't I take him to the Orthodox Church? He might feel something if I take him there. And so I did. I took him there. It didn't really hit with him at that moment, but he actually ended up later becoming Orthodox because of it. However, I will kind of preface or give a little caveat. He ended up finding a community somewhere out of state. He moved out of state and he found an Orthodox community. He ended up joining some like schismatic of the Orthodox. And he sent it to me and I was like, bro, that's not even Orthodox, but I'm like, whatever.
That's the difficulty.
I hope it planted a seed, or I just ruined that guy's life. But
I really do try to, and this is a pastoral conundrum. Tell people you need to go where you're being saved. And what matters most to me for people is not like getting them to come into my church and like become what I am. Every church is going to have its own difficulties. I really do pastorally try to focus on your salvation. That's what matters most to me. Where I have a difficulty now, where I would have a difficulty to saying just go to the Orthodox Church, don't go to our church, is that there seems to be a kind of neo-Donatism today, where there's a lack of charity, and almost a schismatic spirit among many Orthodox. And I'm not talking about all Orthodox. As you know, you'll never hear me say a bad thing about the Orthodox Church because I love the Orthodox Church. Right. It gives me my sustenance in most ways. So this has now become a problem in my own soul, pastorally speaking, because when someone says, you know, I'm going to the Orthodox Church, I'm now beginning to wonder, great, are you going to become hateful towards everybody else? Are you going to get in one of these groups that defines itself on what it is not, as opposed to what its real encounter was?
That's a danger.
It's a real danger, especially with catechumens and new converts, especially evangelical converts, is they go in and they define themselves against Catholics, and that's their starting point. And it makes them feel elect. It makes them feel special. And they confuse that feeling of specialness for actual holiness when really it's just prelest.
Yeah.
They're just feeling the feeling
agree.
of being better than the other. And that's not orthodoxy. So I want to say that clearly. That is not orthodoxy.
The irony with those groups is that they preach humility. Then when you ask them about Catholics, the pride comes out. It's all pride. It's like, no, they completely change. The whole humility thing goes out the window. With those groups in particular.
Yeah, these specific encounters, which are becoming a greater phenomenon all the time. I'm seeing it more and more. So that does bring me deep sorrow. So where I would have a hard time sending someone to Novus Ordo churches for the same reason. I also have a hard time sending them unless I know the priest.
Unless you know that like these guys are legit.
Well, I need to know the priest. I need to know what the community is like. that makes it easier for me if someone's
Right.
inclined toward orthodoxy and they're going, I'm just not buying the Byzantine Catholic thing. Okay, well, where can I send you that's going to actually save your soul, not turn you into an arrogant prick?
Yeah.
That matters to me.
Yeah. Which that hasn't been my experience, like working with Orthodox priests and talking to Orthodox people. That hasn't been my experience, but I've seen it. I've seen it like mostly online. I've seen that type of behavior. And I'm like, that's not what I'm familiar with, you know? But yeah, it's sad. It's sad to see that when, like you're saying, they try to identify themselves by what they're not. And that's a real
And you can't catch
that's a
and
problem.
you can't catch it through osmosis either.
Yeah.
You got to actually practice it. The purification cuts both ways. You actually have to live into the purification of your church. You can't just, I'm Orthodox and now I'm holy. I'm
Yeah.
Byzantine Catholic and now I'm holy. It doesn't work that way.
Right. So I was having this conversation with Alex too about the liturgy. We have a podcast that we filmed entirely about the liturgy, so that'll be coming out soon. And he made some interesting points, and he mentioned, Matt Fradd. He said, I thought this was a good exemplification of humility, where he says something along the lines of like, I don't deserve a good liturgy, you know. There's that aspect of it too. I could see both. I could see both ways. The liturgy can predispose you to the holy mysteries, right? I think that's fair to say that should happen, right? When you go to the liturgy, it should predispose you to the holy mysteries. But then I also see the humility aspect. If you're a faithful Catholic and all you have is a Novus Ordo around you, to kind of embrace it with humility and obedience, I think that ultimately can even be like a great sign of obedience, doing something that you don't want to do, going to Mass on Sundays and participating in the life of the church and the services when you know it's not living up to the highest expression of the liturgical theology, I suppose. So I can see it from that. However, you kind of have to be a trained mind to do that, versus like if you just bring a random person, that might be a bad experience for them, and they'll probably not want to go there ever again.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not in opposition to the Novus Ordo. So I'm not saying that it's unholy. I'm saying what I seem to see and hear is that the way that it's expressed is really unholy. It sounds like bad Protestantism, the stuff that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And I'm not universalizing this. I'm not saying that every Novus Ordo church is like that, but I keep hearing the complaint. You hear the complaint.
And I think that's fair to say. It's fair to say it's problematic, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I'm hearing people tell me really horrific things, like playing Hillsong during baptism, I'm very concerned.
Yeah.
That should be concerning to any Catholic priest. And if it's not, there's a real problem. Because you're not experiencing the Catholic faith if you think you need Hillsong to make a good liturgy.
Yeah.
So, I'm not deserving of salvation. Okay, that's true too. I'm not deserving of salvation. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to go after salvation. Being attracted to a good liturgy, being attracted to what is beautiful, what is good, what is true, is simply to be a good human.
Right.
Because those are reflections of God. So I 100% understand why someone would say, I cannot live in this.
Yeah.
I cannot raise my children in this because I'm afraid that they are not experiencing the goodness, the beauty, and the truth of God. Yeah, we're getting the Eucharist, but it's the whole life of the church which makes the quality of the Eucharist more profound. So you can receive the Eucharist and receive zero benefits if you're not properly disposed. And I would argue a bad liturgy can put someone in a place where they're not properly disposed. If the whole time you're in liturgy, all you're thinking about is like this priest who just came in wearing, a stole. I wear flip flops.
Oh, do you?
Well, they're not flip flops. I wear Birkenstocks. Sorry, it's all good. If your whole time you're thinking, but maybe you are thinking about the flip flops, But if that's what you're focused on, the whole time, the priest is wearing an eagle's stole or something.
Yeah.
I saw something like that, and he's flapping his arms. No way, I could not stay there. I'm not going to subject my children to that form of the liturgy. To me, that's repulsive and disgusting. To trivialize the divine liturgy. I mean, how can someone grow up with respect? When you have little kids running up on the holy altar or something, when you have people just running around everywhere, how can you develop respect?
Yeah,
you're going to have to tell your kids all the time, like, they're going to grow up and you're going to be like, this isn't how we're supposed to worship God, but you're never going to get to worship God the way you're supposed to, and you're just going to have to suck that up. As a parent, I couldn't do it.
Well, this is precisely why I was having this conversation with Alex about, from a cultural aspect, right now we're seeing the encroachment of the rise of Islam. We're seeing that in the Western countries, the development of Islam, and from somebody who's interested in Islam, if they were to go to the Novus Ordo and they would go to the mosque, I'd be like, I think that's pretty black and white, where you can feel that you're worshiping God, And that's why I think the liturgy is important. I mean, I'm not trying to trivialize and say like, well, it kind of doesn't matter, just kind of suck it up and whatever. But that's why I think the Orthodox liturgy is a perfect, for me, the Orthodox liturgy, the divine liturgy is the pinnacle of liturgical worship. That's just my opinion. But I think that if somebody were inquiring into Islam or Christianity and their experience of worship was something like a Protestant worship, it's easier for them to lean towards something like Islam, where
for most of us, not all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, so young men are flooding the traditional churches. Women are flooding Novus Ordo churches. Wow. There's a different encounter, I think, that's being had.
Yeah, I guess as far as young men are concerned, because that's probably who I'm speaking to, and it's probably the trend that I'm seeing of people that want to dive deeper in a faith. They just don't know where it is, and if they walk into like the run-of-the-mill Novus Ordo, they're probably not going to be as inspired to stay there. Versus if they go to a mosque, they might feel like, whoa, like all these men, they're very disciplined, they're all orderly. They're all prostrating before God. Like, we're treating this like we're in the presence of God. We're in a holy place. We're in the temple. That might be attractive to the... Versus if they came here to the Byzantine liturgy here at your church, they're going to get that in its fullest expression. That's what I would argue. They would get it in the fullest expression.
Yeah, and they're going to feel the life of the saints.
Yeah.
They're going to feel the holiness of the church. Right? All of our... We're going to start off with matins. We're going to be going through the Synexarion. We're going to be going through the Maneon, all the lives of the saints, the odes which are written by saints, the Troparion, the Kantakion. It's going to directly the music. It's going to directly relate to Mary and the saints and Jesus, and it's going to be telling the historical picture of the church itself. Right? Yeah. It's not going to be some abstract, fuzzy, Hallmark card, which is
that's what I wanted to get to, is that Orthodox do right is the praxis, not separating the theology from what the everyday lived experience. And I think that's the problem with people that are inquiring into Christianity, is that they're seeing, like when I was first, growing up, I didn't think Christianity was that deep. I didn't know how deep it actually went. And then you read something like the Spiritual Psalter of St. Ephraim the Syrian. You're like, wow, I didn't know they actually cared about God this much. Like, that might sound stupid, but that was my experience. I was like, I thought Christianity was just kind of like, it doesn't go that deep. Like, I think philosophy is a lot deeper. Like, I think Plato's like, Aristotle, like, that's deep. But then I didn't realize the apostolic faiths, they go super deep. It's not just like hand clapping and
if they're living it. Yeah, but I honestly, like, one of the phenomena that I keep running into, Jonathan, is like, I'll talk to, and this is why I'm genuinely concerned. I think I think the bishops are concerned too. In the Latin churches, I oftentimes meet Catholics who say, like, they want to tell me how deep their relationship with God is, and it's like, look, I have a picture of Mary, and I believe in like this like apparition with all my heart, and if I die with the scapular on, I go right to heaven. I'm like,
don't like that.
That's not deep.
Yeah.
That's not deep. That's so shallow. Like, how is that any different than if you're a Protestant? I mean, it's probably better to say this as a Protestant. Like, I believe that Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead. That's deeper to me than that you're convinced of some like mystical experience or encounter. Like, depth has to have purification. It cannot just be like a belief in like, I really like the Guadalupe. Like, I told you about a buddy of mine who once told me that he had the Guadalupe on his wall. And he said, you worship Jesus. We Catholics worship the Guadalupe.
Wait, who said that?
This buddy of mine. It's like, wow. Like,
wait, a Catholic said we worship the Guadalupe?
Yeah.
He was joking with you, just to kind of mess with you? Or?
No, he was dead serious.
He was serious.
He was dead serious. Back when I was a Protestant. Yeah, dead serious.
Weird.
Oh, it's weird, So there's some people who think they're deep just because they believe in mystical experiences, and that, like, there is a danger there too, like that. But
that's that legalism, though. I think that like, I do this, I get that. It kind of reminds me of Islam because I don't know how familiar you are with the religion. They have a lot of like it's kind of like a game. Like, there's all kinds of ways you can get points. It's like you pray, like they'll have like special weekends, and they'll be like, you pray during this weekend, you get extra points. You go to Mecca on this day, you get extra points. It's like a video game.
You like green? Muhammad liked green? No, you're better.
Yeah. Pray this prayer and it
use this toothbrush because Muhammad used this toothbrush.
Yeah, I swear it's like that. It's
no,
like,
those are actually true things. I was giving real examples.
Really?
Yeah, those are real examples. Yeah.
You're being facetious.
No, I wasn't. Those are real things.
Toothbrush?
Yeah.
How does that work?
He had a special toothbrush that he used. Like, it was like a palm branch or something. Like a special one that he liked to use. He was very clean with his teeth.
That's what the scapular kind of reminds me of, and I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate because people really love that. I'm not a fan of like, and that I mean, I'm probably just because I'm so ignorant of it. I think if I maybe learned a little bit more, I'd probably appreciate it more. But just at first glance, it kind of reminds me of that type of legalistic attitude that you see in Islam.
Yeah. So if you're wearing the scapular because you think that you magically,
it's like a guarantee.
Yeah. If you're doing that, that's wrong.
It's a safeguard.
If you're making a dedication to God and the scapular is a reminder, like wearing a cross, that's a different thing. If it's something that draws you into purification and is consistent, that's a good thing. But if you're anything that's superstitious, whether it's the Orthodox all-seeing eye or the misuse of a scapular or something like that, or the what is it called, the eye of evil, the evil eye, yeah, anything that is simply superstitious and isn't leading to a consistent spirituality, like a consistent pray all times spirituality, like always looking to God, always searching for God with your heart. If anything, if it's not doing that, then it's a distraction, and most likely you're getting into some kind of scrupulosity or religiosity.
Do you think indulgences can kind of lead to that?
Yeah, if they're not done correctly, they can. Of course, they have. But you're going to have abuses. You're going to have abuses.
Well, not even like the abuses. Like, I've seen some Orthodox criticism of indulgences where it's like the Pope. It's kind of like goes back to like the Islam thing. The Pope said, if you post this to your social media, you get this indulgence or something. Like,
you have to see. So it's kind of like, it can very much be
kind of like a game wrong. Too.
It can be. Yeah, you have to look at the qualifications of what makes an indulgence, partial and like plenary and like.
But I think the rules. I think because I think even Alex brought up one where it's like, if you read the Bible 15 minutes a day, and I think about it and like, well, what if I read it 10 minutes a day? What if I read it 14 minutes a day? 14 and a half minutes a day? Now we're kind of making this legalistic, and I'm like, that's what I don't like about. And maybe that just might be my misunderstanding of what it is, but
I'm not a big fan of it. But when you understand it more completely, like I have the regulations here for indulgences if you wanted to look at them. But they're actually like pretty serious. Like, to get a full the plenary indulgence, did you know that you can't even be connected to a single venial sin to get it? That's like one of the I think three things that you need for a plenary indulgence. So people think they're getting it. We offer a plenary indulgence for this thing. Do you know that you have, in order to actually receive the benefit of that thing, of like you have to take the Eucharist and some other things, and but the thing that sticks out to me is you have to have zero attachment to venial sin to get this thing. In other words, you have to be totally purified to receive the benefit of this indulgence. So it's what most people don't know that. So it does come off as very legalistic because it's not connected with like the official teaching on the subject. So there's always a danger of it becoming legalistic.
Right.
But I think giving people activities to grow closer with God, call them indulgences if you like, it's an important part of being a human, right? It's an important part of teaching your kids how to become mature adults by saying, if you go clean your room, I'm going to give you $10, right? So it's like for an immature mind, sometimes what we need is law. So St. Paul said that law was given not for the righteous, but for the unrighteous. So all of our churches have lots of law. St. Nicodemus, the Agorite who composed the Philokalia for us, who put together the text, also is the composer of the rudder.
Yeah.
So none of our churches can escape law. Most of the analogies of St. Paul about salvation relate directly to Old Testament law. So, atonement is a law concept. So law is going to be part of our churches. We just have to always keep in mind that it's an analogy. It's not the like absolute vision of God. It's an analogy about how to relate to God. But if we go too far, we'll become legalistic and bound to a law again instead of the spirit of freedom.
What if someone were to criticize it and kind of be like, well, I want to do these things out of love and of deepening my relationship with God, not because I know I'm going to get a plenary indulgence or something along those lines.
Okay.
Like it wouldn't.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You're going to get it anyway because you're doing it right.
That's funny.
It doesn't matter what you call it. It's what matters is what you're doing at that point.
Yeah. Well, I guess in the sense of like redirecting the focus, like somebody could be too focused on like, I'm stacking up all these indulgences and
I don't like that.
yeah.
I don't like that at all. No, I don't like that at all. But I mean, St. Paul does say like, store up treasures in heaven.
Yeah.
That's an appeal. That's an appeal. Like maybe I need to think more like that. Maybe it would help me more often because I'm not altruistic. So I do definitely, even in any act that I do that is good, I always have some kind of secondary motive. I figure that out when I start analyzing my thoughts. Like very few times are my actions completely pure. So sometimes, humans need, if you tell a human, work as hard as you can, and at the end of the day, all of your money is going to go to somebody else. Like, what human's going to do that?
Right.
So, well, no, we're humans and we're not altruistic. So what do we say? You work and you'll get this payment. And
but even like physiologically, like we have this feeling of good. Like if you give something to somebody, you feel good about it. Like, imagine if you felt terrible. Like you get the same feeling of like you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it because you don't get that I don't know what chemical it is, dopamine or whatever it is.
Yeah. Until you're purified, you wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Or you could force yourself through it, but then most likely you'd feel good about yourself for forcing yourself to do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's inescapable. The only way that pans out at the end is once you're purified. But other than that, until you're purified, it's like you got to doggedly force yourself to do what's right. You got to doggedly force yourself to say the Jesus prayer. Yeah. And you do that long before you're purified. And so indulgences are a way for people who aren't yet purified to actually do something. Like, how many people...
I mean, that's fair. Yeah.
If I come to you and I go, hey, Father, let's imagine you're the priest. Like, hey, Father, what can I do? I want to deepen my spiritual life. People want a thing to do. Do you keep the commandments? I do keep the commandments. Okay. Do you Go to church? Yeah, I go to the church. Okay.
You get a prayer rule.
Like you start to develop a prayer rule. You start to develop devotionals to include your life. Obviously one of the first things we say is to try to play the Jesus prayer. But sometimes the Jesus prayer, you get bored and you need something more, and so you want to do matins, you want to do vespers. It's like the human mind is weak. I went and laid down in front of the Pantocrator yesterday, and I observed that in the first hour of doing it was very joyous. In the second hour, I got bored, and I needed to do something else, right? And it's like, I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm weak.
Yeah,
I need something else.
We're human.
I need to stimulate my mind. Hopefully the thing that I choose to stimulate my mind with is something holy. It's something good. It might not be perfect Noetic prayer, but it's something that hopefully is edifying. It's something hopefully that's good for me.
That makes sense. Yeah, I mean, like reading the Bible, like not every time you read it, you're gonna be like, wow. Sometimes you're reading it, you're just like, I just need to read it just to.
Yeah.
You just need to do it. Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Father, thank you so much for sitting down with me. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Search of the Lost.
Search of the Lost on YouTube.
Yep.
Put the link in the description. You guys can check out his amazing YouTube channel. He has tons of great interviews, tons of great topics on there. Thank you again, Father.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.